Many statistics class will focus on a lot of methods and models to describe how decisions are made in a quantitative fashion. And we're certainly doing that in this class. But I think it's also important in the context of global business to understand that managers today are faced with making decisions under unprecedented uncertainty. And all the analytics that we have are not going to remove the challenges that we face as managers, as leaders, making decisions under these conditions. So this section of the class is going to allow us to focus on some of the decision-making biases and influences that we have on ourselves and often with others interpersonally when we're trying to make decisions. So the objective for this is to look at decision-making and why analytics offers desirable assistance that we badly need, but also notice that sometimes decision-making can be changed depending on how we interpret the situation in terms of risks and situational factors that are happening in the moment. We're going to contrast different types of decision risks and the fallacies that might bring them about, that make us think or believe that we're more confident than maybe we should be. And we could rely on statistics in those cases. We also want to look at different strategies that can help remedy decision-making risks when data analytics sometimes fail us. So what are some of the caveats and tips and tricks we can use to help us as managers make better decisions? There's a great quote that was made famous by Mark Twain, but actually attributed to a British Prime Minister, that there are three kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics. And when we're looking at decision-making under situations of uncertainty, this type of quote really applies, in that sometimes we could get it right, but sometimes we might be tricked into thinking that something is something that is not. It's a lie, and we might be relying on statistics in the moment. And it's all of these three things sort of coming together. We could be misinformed. It could be really somebody trying to mislead us. And we could still be looking at something that's quantitative in the process and still get the decision wrong. There's different types of things that we can think about going into what a decision is. In a very simple form, a decision is effectively an action of a choice being made with different options to achieve a goal. So if I have a simple situation of just what will you have for lunch today, you have a set of choices. Maybe you're at a restaurant and you choose one. So that's a decision being made to achieve a goal of getting a meal. Here I have a business situation. Which promotion, maybe an incentive or a coupon, might be most effective for retaining our top customers? That's a very common decision that needs to be made by most businesses. And in doing that, we can rely on statistical tests. And in fact, statistical analytics are some of the best that you can utilize to make these kinds of decisions, because we would be making that decision on what is the best option to serve our customers with some kind of a promotion based on a sample that is a subset of all the customers that we could possibly serve with our product or service. We need to make a decision on maybe just a subset of those because we don't have the time and expense to actually ask all of them. It might also be just impossible to do so. We might be making that decision based on opinions. That is what either we internally think our best customers would like, or again, maybe we have a sample and we've just asked them what they prefer. And we also might be making judgments or estimates. Again, managers or leaders of the business sort of making that estimate, or we could be asking our customers, if we were to make a promotion available to you, which one seems most attractive? In all of those cases, we can rely on statistics and those kinds of methods, statistical methods, to help us make that decision, answering the question as compared to, as I have on the bottom here, different types of measurement or science that are not going to be analytic or statistical, that are appropriate to answer questions like these. How many centimeters in a meter? That's a very precise answer that's measured with facts. And we often have those kinds of measures are often not available to us when we're trying to make business types of decisions of the type like what promotion is best to serve our customers. So we need different techniques. And we have those, but of course it opens up new challenges to us, and that's what we're going to touch on. Managerial decision making under these conditions, such as which promotion our customers most prefer, is increasingly relying on managerial judgment to be mixed with data at the same time. And so you have to rely on both intuition and analytics at the same time, and this is sort of the unique mix. Analytics, particularly around these data models, are super useful to us in helping us make those predictions and optimize the choice in terms of, say, what's best the promotion for our customer or our client. And it can help companies actually avoid common judgment errors. That's why we want to use the statistics. And they're very effective at doing that, but we do have to be aware of some context, which we're going to cover here, that sometimes we can still get led astray. And many executives are actually concerned about these kinds of errors. That is, they're relying increasingly on statistics and analytics to make their decisions. So a recent survey by Accenture in their Technology 2018 Vision, citing that 82% of the executives report a greater reliance on automated decision-making even for analytics in the business. But nearly the same amount, 79%, saying most of them have not actually had the ability to verify that the results that they're getting out of the systems, which it often would be a statistical analytical result, such as these are the promotions that my customer likes best, they're unverifiable, or they don't have the time and expense to actually verify the result. They just don't have the capabilities to assess the truth. And this is the challenge that we see, especially in the big data economy that we're in, the balance around relying on the analytics, but also some concern that maybe the veracity of it is such that we cannot verify the truth. In this, we have new vulnerabilities then arise in our decision making. That is, we might see that we're making decisions based on inaccurate information that has been maybe manipulated either on purpose or unknowingly. There's both known and unknown human biases as well, and we're going to touch on some of those. Those are our own biases that we might not have awareness, and when we're looking at an analytic, a number, a result, some kind of statistics, it's influencing our interpretation of that outside of our awareness. And systems are also possibly complicit in this in making matters worse. That is, sometimes data-driven decision-making can actually result in poor decisions because of bad information that was being fed the analytic model, or again, the interpretation of it. And increasingly, this is an enterprise-wide challenge for businesses, meaning that it can affect every function in the business, really important decisions. So ensuring the integrity of data is really becoming a paramount focus for managers, and not just going in assuming that just because there's a statistic associated with some kind of outcome that it's necessarily unbiased, because that would be putting a little bit too much false hope that everything was in order. And I'm going to highlight on some of those areas that you can look at as a manager or leader as we go forward. About 92% of a recent survey by KPMG were very concerned, that is, executives were very concerned about these very kinds of impacts on companies, particularly when the analytics could have some kind of impact on the company's reputation or the brand. And indeed, you can find examples where good decisions supposedly were made with analytics or data, but it had irreparable harm on the company in some way, something sometimes embarrassing, sometimes actually something that might lend them to some kind of a lawsuit because they're not acting in good nature, even though it was based on data. It was something that was erroneous or wrong, and I'll highlight some of these. So analytics actually encode both of these biases. That is, analytics that we're relying on could have a bias in the data that come into the result. And because analytics are built by human beings, analytics can often have the distortions that are human-based, that are either in their awareness or outside of their awareness. So one of the takeaways that I think is worth highlighting is to be cautious, be skeptical. Analytics are really no better than the people that are building them. And there are examples where this can take decision-making in the wrong direction. So I'll highlight one of these. There was a recent study that looked at policing in the Cincinnati, Ohio area of the United States. Now, those of you that might not know that area, it's very popular for baseball. They have a baseball team there called the Cincinnati Reds. And the researchers were looking to help police against gangs in that area. And so they wanted to look at words that were associated with gangs. And it so happens that some of those gangs actually use different colors to identify their persona with the gang. And so some of the words that they were looking at programming in included words like red, for example, which was one of the words associated with the gang, park, run, cap, hit, gun, strike. These are all different color words that the analytics were using to hopefully identify the gang activity in an area, looking at social media activity such as Twitter posts or Facebook posts. The thing is, as I mentioned at the start, Cincinnati is home to the Cincinnati Reds. And words like hit or cap or run and the word red can also be associated basically with everyday people that are just going to baseball games. And that's exactly what ended up happening with this analytic model. So they were trying to use it to police gang activity, but it was actually just as effective, maybe even more effective, at basically identifying people that were going to a Cincinnati Red baseball game. So you can imagine the challenge if the Cincinnati Police Department were to start to take action on people suspecting them of gang activity who are actually just trying to go to a baseball game. Those people could maybe claim discrimination. Maybe some people would be investigated falsely for crimes. And you can let your imagination run wild on how that might work. And this is a real challenge with the analytics using otherwise appropriate types of words that might identify gangs could also inadvertently identify regular kind of everyday activities. When we break this up in terms of the types of decisions that are made and the types of biases that you're likely to see, I find it helpful to look at these 4 different quadrants. On the very bottom here, we have the dimension on the x-axis of decision-making. And decision-making can range from biased to unbiased. And then on the y-axis, we have a range of decisions that relying on analytics that are either distorted or valid. And hopefully we're spending most of our time in business and as managers working at that upper right quadrant where we're making unbiased and valid decisions based on the data. And that way they're ethical, we can be transparent, and people looking at that decision would probably come to the same decision. Unfortunately, you can see that it can break into these other quadrants here. And so I think it's worth stepping through each one of these and thinking about examples that we might encounter as managers or leaders in our companies. So starting with the best case scenario where you have both valid and unbiased decision making, well, let's just call that the truth. If you are able to look at data and sort of discern from a pattern that's repeatable and reliable, and everyone would come to the same conclusion that it's valid, that's definitely a situation we want to be in. Some examples where that's often the case is especially when you're relying on data that you as the manager cannot directly influence. Some examples of that might be, in this case, farmers utilize forecasts such as weather data to decide what plants to crop, that is based on how much rainfall is expected or the temperatures for the year. They don't have an immediate direct impact on those kinds of variables like weather and how much rain, and therefore they're making an unbiased decision on the day or time to actually maybe plant crops. Another example, a little bit more modern day, a lot of websites that you visit are actually doing what they call A/B testing. So they'll actually present a different layout on the website to see the impact that it has on people visiting the website, such as the propensity for people to maybe click on an ad, which is very important to advertising revenue. Since we don't have a direct impact on how people are choosing to click on maybe one ad or another, this can be an effective way and a non-biased, valid way of determining whether one website design is better than another. So this is commonly used today, especially in website design and in advertising of products on those sites. A third example might be if this was actually, I believe it was Cambridge University that had a researcher look at predicting the valuation of wines after they were bottled. And this is commonly done before these kinds of models based on judgment of experts. People who are very experienced tasting wine are able to predict or basically value the wine after it's been bottled. They were able to build a model using variables such as the winter rainfall, the harvest rainfall, and the temperature of the year that the grapes were grown, and effectively predict the value of that wine across its lifetime, basically when it came to market, more effectively than the connoisseurs were, or at least equally as effectively. So these are examples where by utilizing data that is unbiased and valid, we're able to get value out of them because we're measuring the truth. For things that executives cannot directly influence, this is where the new analytic models, especially when you're looking at variables like these that you cannot directly influence, can be very helpful, really useful. Unfortunately, we don't always have a situation that is upper right quadrant. Sometimes we have a situation like these type 3 where we have otherwise unbiased decision, but the data has been distorted. So there were a set of researchers that were training an analytic model. This would be a computer artificial intelligence model to distinguish the difference between wolves and wild dogs. And they programmed this by showing the computer images of wolves and wild dogs over and over again until the computer got very good at detecting the difference between these two. And it did wildly well. In fact, it did so well, the researchers were very excited at the advancement that it represented for artificial intelligence to decipher wolves and dogs, which, as you can imagine, can be relatively similar. The thing is, what they had actually trained the model to do was detect the presence of snow and no snow. Now, that in itself is sort of amazing, and maybe they should have been congratulating each other for doing that. But this happened because every image of a wolf always appeared in a white background, and the wild dogs did not have snow in the background. The error, though, in judgment is they truly believed that the model was effective at detecting these two different species, that is wolves and wild dogs, when it actually was effective at detecting in something entirely different, snow and no snow. And this is where you have a distorted decision being made because the data effectively going in was wrong. It was interpreted wrong by, in fact, in this case, a machine. And so they were making unbiased decisions, but they were basing it on entirely the wrong information. So in these type 3 sort of unbiased decisions with distorted data, we have to be aware of these things in the wider context. It's one thing to get dogs and wolves mixed up, but these are other kinds of examples that have actually been happening as we're looking at more data in the industry. Banks and insurance companies, for example, they often use algorithms to predict whether or not they should have a loan on a building in a certain area in a city. But if the neighborhoods in those cities have had years and years of economic disparity, and perhaps some are disadvantaged for other factors, other political factors, maybe social factors that have made a certain area in the city predominantly maybe impoverished for other reasons, it could, in fact, be correlated with factors of race or factors of poverty. And so then by having the algorithm make the decision based on what should be an unbiased decision based on location, it's confounded with these other social factors. And now we are making an unintentionally biased decision to perhaps not make a loan on a certain building in a city. And that actually is distorted and it's biased. So the bank or the insurance company may, in fact, not know that, but because of these factors that are underlying the data, they're actually making a biased decision. So these are database decisions where the system could actually reflect the larger society. And if that's biased, then of course the decision making, even by the machine, is biased, just like in the wolf and wild dog situation. So there's been some cautions that big data can really have a perverse result of exacerbating existing inequalities in society because of historic systematic disadvantages in communities. And this is an example where, as a manager, as a leader, we have to watch out for these sort of things unknowingly happening to us as we're relying on these analytic models, particularly machine models, that we have to be aware and ask our question, is the foundation of what they're doing the analytics on biased? And if it is, then of course the result will still be biased. Location is another example. Location-based services with advertising is another example where some of this data may be biased. This is a huge advertising boom to the industry to have about 16 billion in a year associated with location-based advertising. So this is the ads that maybe a mall or a location where someone is might send some kind of an incentive to purchase something based on the location of where they are. But again, there have been examples where the accelerometers, which are in usually mobile devices that are determining the location of people, they can be tricked or they can be just erroneous. This has happened by even just a simple audible tone that's being picked up by one of these cell phones with an accelerometer can register more steps in the day. So if you are an advertiser and you say to your advertising agency, I really want to target people with an offer who are active, that are really doing a lot of physical activity, maybe it's some kind of health-related product. If this were going on in a large way, you could in fact be getting people who are not active at all. But it's distorted data that's coming in, and that's affecting your decision making. Another example, MethBot was used to actually fake IP addresses, that is basically acting as if people were clicking on certain ads, and that generated 3 to 5 million of daily advertising revenues in this case. And so again, we had distorted data going in. Our decision was unbiased. We were trying to reach people, customers that were the appropriate ones for our products. But unfortunately, the data that we based that on was wrong from the beginning. Now, I'd like for you to imagine this scenario and then make a decision yourself. Perhaps your company is going to make you a hiring manager, and you have an applicant that's coming to you and is going to be interviewed, and each interviewer is going to choose a word to describe that candidate. And these are the words that you see on the right that each of these interviewers have given you as the hiring manager the description of this candidate. So the 6 that were interviewed and described them as intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious. Now, your decision in this scenario is rate how likely you would be to hire this applicant. So just pause a moment and maybe think about that, whether you would hire that person or not hire that person, how likely you would feel about that based on this information that you were just given from the people who interviewed this candidate. Now, this situation has actually been done in research many, many times. And what they find is that when the words are laid out exactly as you see them here, describing this applicant, people are far more likely to hire the candidate than if they are presented with the words in this order. Now, you're going to notice between these 2 slides, the only difference is the order of the words, not the words themselves. So if we were unbiased in making the decision, however you thought about that candidate in the prior slide, you should still rate them to be the same level of hireability, that is, your desire to hire them. However, when we do this with many people in many situations, most of the time when people are presented with a description of the candidate in this order, they're less likely to want to hire them. And maybe you had the same impression. This is exactly the kind of internal bias that's going on as we're interpreting information. And imagine here that it was just the words that switched, and maybe your sentiment about whether you want to hire the person is changed just because the word envious and stubborn are now leading the list rather than intelligent and industrious. It's because that's the first impression that we have in our minds of a person like that. And we think, do we really want to have someone like that reporting to us or on our team or working with that person? And we're less likely to want to have somebody that's stubborn and envious. So our feelings about a particular topic can bias the different impressions that we have. So this is now another example of this biased decisions with valid data. The valid data in the prior example were the words. But we see this over and over again. When we read these two statements on the right that I have framed up for you, that the probability of surviving a medical procedure is 90%, versus the probability of dying from the medical procedure is 10%. People seeing the second one, that the probability to die is 10%, they consider the procedure much more serious, even though you can see cognitively that both of the examples are equivalent. The idea is surviving 90% is equivalent to the procedure, people dying at 10%. The rate is the same. But we have a different psychological impression of this. And this has to do with framing effects where our decisions end up biased, even though the data are valid. It depended on the framing of the data. So another example here, again, with a little bit of a medical theme to that, patients that are similar to Mr. Jones, this might be a challenge or a choice that is like maybe a parole board may need to make about a patient that's in the hospital, maybe getting released. Patients similar to Mr. Jones are estimated to have a 10% probability of committing an act of violence against others in the first several months after discharge from the hospital. Then the second statement, again, it's going to be similar. Of every 100 patients similar to Mr. Jones, 10 are estimated to commit an act of violence. So quantitatively, these are equivalent, again, but when people read the second instance, they conjure up a number of violent incidences and are actually less likely to align with having the person discharged from incarceration or from a hospital in tests when we do these over and over in labs. And so we're very susceptible to these kind of quantitative reasonings when figures that are presented to us as absolute counts, such as in the second example, 10 out of 100 versus percentage. We have a different perception of percentages, and a percentage just seems sort of ethereal or difficult to get our minds around versus, say 1 in 10, which is an example in the second case. So this can be used, for good or for ill when we're making decisions. One last example on this, you'll often see in a business context, particularly someone that's in sales or marketing, they might present a situation like this to you. If we don't launch this product, we're going to lose 10% of our market share. Or they might say, if we launch this product, we can gain 10% more market share. Now, statistically, you can imagine how those two situations might be entirely equivalent in some quantitative fashion, like dollars or money in some kind. However, when we are presented with this, people are typically risk averse. That is, we put an undue weight on losing something that we have. So by being presented with the first statement that we might lose 10% market share, we're more motivated to do something than if we're presented with a second situation, 10% gain. So this is something, again, to be mindful that we could be making a biased decision on otherwise valid data. In both situations, they're valid, but it was the positioning of it that mattered. Okay, now I'm going to go to the last segment of that quadrant on type 1. This is perhaps the most insidious situation where we have a double whammy. We have both interpersonal or personal biases interacting with perhaps distorted data. There is an actual project going on right now in the country of China. Many cities have already signed up for this. They have a target by 2020 through the Sharp Eyes project to ensure that the government has surveillance and a network that monitors the activities of all of the citizens of China. Right now, they're doing that by combining different kinds of analytics with video surveillance. And people would be basically sharing their credentials, such as their particulars, their names, date of birth, where they live, where they work. with other kinds of data that the government is able to use to actually monitor them. And by having the surveillance throughout the country, you're able to, as this picture is showing in the upper quadrant here, perhaps a subway or some public transit, as people are going through, they can actually identify people in the database and determine how trustworthy they are. The intent is to actually have a social credit score of type so that people's trustworthiness could actually be determined on the fly. Now, there's many valid and important reasons that they want to pursue this effectively to prevent crime. You can imagine how difficult it might be to do a crime in the country of China with these kinds of systems. And in fact, just recently, prototypes of these systems were successful at identifying a suspect out of 60,000 people attending a outdoor concert in China. So these systems are already up and running and supposedly identifying people who have committed crimes. And so that's a good thing when it's right. But you could imagine where this social credit score is influenced by people that you are around. And so if I'm with my buddy Jeb, and Jeb has done something I don't know, my social credit card score could be affected in trustworthiness because he or she has actually done something that has been a crime. And so this is the concern that if this gets out of control, you could have distorted data effectively picking up perpetrators who are not perpetrators, sort of back to the Cincinnati Reds example that we started out with. So this is very much a concern when making decisions around analytics. These tools can be used to help predict things, but if it's based on biased data, where are we? In this example here about further making decisions about recidivism, for example, how likely is someone to commit a crime again, some tests are showing that, in fact, these algorithms are no better than our own judgments. And so if we're relying on the systems because we think the systems are better at detecting these things, but in fact, we're no better than our own judgment, which in this example here recently has shown, we have a false hope. And in fact, we're really led down the wrong road, that we're making a better decision, either because the systems are wrong or we're biased or just everything is really mixed up there. And we could be led down the path that we're making a better decision when we're not. So there are many asymmetries that we need to be concerned about that might take advantage of these systems or our own decision making. And that's really the challenge, especially with business and managers today. So what to do about all this? Because it's very complicated. Well, there's no simple answer there. The best experts that have looked at this have some simple tactics, though, that I think are worth taking to heart. The first is we should be tracking our own expectations when we're setting a goal that's based on an analytic. And we want to try to reward realism. So, for example, when a sales forecast is actually made, perhaps we track how well the forecast came out to actuals, and we want to reward people that are making realistic estimates of the future. And this can help maybe avoid some biases for either being overly optimistic about some things or not even predicting enough. And so we want to try to reward realism. That's one tip that we can take as managers. Another is to try to supplement things. So if you're making a decision that's very important, it's a great strategy to get a fresh set of eyes. That is somebody that isn't directly involved in the decision. They may not have some of those emotional biases that we've talked about that are motivated in the decision making. And that way, maybe you're getting a second opinion that is less biased. And you need to triangulate those to see the direction that you need to go. Finally, you could also just create a healthy data-centric culture. So this is where, of course, managerial judgment still matters. I mean, that's why people are in the roles that they have. But we want to ensure that everyone is mobilized to work together and learn from the patterns. And that way, there's less pressure on people maybe making the decision that's overly optimistic or biased in some way. These are some different tactics that we can do with organizational culture or managers. So the takeaway is that, more than ever before, I think you can see that modern organizations are going to rely on managers making decisions using these analytics. That's what this course is all about. And we're finding more and more executives acknowledging that analytics are part of their daily decision making. But despite that, we have to be aware that there are biases. There are biases sometimes in the data. There's biases sometimes in our internally for us or interpersonally as we're working with others that can distort those decisions. And to mitigate that, we do need some constructive efforts then to try to help shape the organization's culture, make it a learning culture, ensure that you allow others to maybe have insight on what the choices are, and rely on a triangulation that is more than one opinion to help us make the decision to help avoid some of these biases.